My early years taught me to be immune to things like ghosts. True horrors, the kind that scars the soul, abuse, neglect, betrayal, had shaped my childhood, leaving no space for spectral fantasies. I didn't believe in the supernatural, or those tales of haunted houses and apparitions were almost laughable in comparison. But there was one person who didn't share my skepticism: Landon. Where I saw darkness in the real world, he found solace in the paranormal, eagerly embracing every creak in the floorboards and every whisper in the night. His obsession was contagious, and for the first time in my life, I found someone who felt like a safe haven. His warmth, his belief in things beyond the material, was unlike anything he'd ever known. We spent countless nights watching documentaries on ghost hunters, their cameras capturing supposed evidence of the supernatural, all the while sharing hushed discussions about what could exist in the unseen world. But one evening, things took an unexpected turn. Out of nowhere, Landon managed to secure funding for a documentary. The subject? Jepson Bone's killing floor. I remember the first time I heard the name. It sounded like something out of a Pulp Fiction novel, too fantastical to be true. I almost laughed it off, but then came the legal documents. The contracts, thick with clauses and signatures, his and mine. This wasn't a passing fascination anymore. It was real. We were bound to it. Despite my overwhelming skepticism, hardened by a childhood far worse than anything fiction could offer, I found myself on a desolate highway in Nevada, driving toward an abandoned prison with a group of professional ghost hunters. The sun sank below the horizon, casting long shadows over the barren landscape, and the prison rose from the desert like a decayed phantom. It was abandoned, its name forgotten, and the towns nearby had no records of its existence. All that remained was a whisper of legend. The team that Landon had assembled came from a well-respected paranormal investigation agency. These weren't just amateurs. They were experts. EMF readers, EVP specialists, even a psychic. And they all knew the story of Jepson Bone. Well, everyone except me. You've never heard of Jepson Bone? Dr. Eris Thorne, the team's lead investigator, asked with disbelief in his voice. His brow furrowed as if he had just confessed to never hearing of a famous historical figure. Landon, eager as ever, filled in the blanks. Jepson Bone wasn't just a murderer. He was something older, something more terrifying. Before the prison was built, this land belonged to him. He was a butcher, a predator with no conscience. He roamed the plains, killing anyone he could find, men, women, children. It didn't matter to him. He relished in it. People gave him different names: the Jester of Jaws, the Crimson Harlequin, the Giggling Reaper. But the terror he spread was always the same. Sarah, the psychic, added, her eyes glazed over in a trance-like state. His murders weren't random. They were part of a ritual. He drained the blood of his victims and used it to paint symbols tied to something dark, something ancient. They finally caught him, Landon continued, voice almost reverent. But they didn't just hang him. They buried him alive. Right here in this place. And they say his spirit still lingers, poisoning the very earth beneath our feet. He looked at me then, his eyes dark with something unspoken. Even if you leave, Alicia, he will follow you. The chill ran down my spine. But why a clown? Sarah's expression softened as though understanding had just washed over her. A clown. It's part of the ritual. A mockery. He twisted everything innocent, laughter, childhood joy, into something monstrous. It was his way of turning something pure into something terrifying. Dr. Thorne added, in some cultures, clowns were seen as tricksters, guides of the dead. The Feast of Fools, pagan rites. There are historical precedents for such rituals. Sacrifices to appease something hungry. Something older than time itself. Landon nodded, a cold intensity in his eyes. Jepson Bone. He became something beyond human. He became fear itself, wrapped in a painted grin. For the first time, I questioned everything I thought I knew. The idea of ghosts suddenly felt plausible and deeply, horribly terrifying. The van stopped with a jolt, and we were there. The prison stood before us, its rusted bars like skeletal fingers reaching toward the sky. The wind was unnaturally still, as though the very air itself held its breath. We stepped out, and my stomach twisted as an eerie sound reached my ears, a distant, low noise that resembled a scream. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, heart racing. Landon, pale as a ghost, nodded. But the others were already excited, oblivious to the dread that had seized me. Sarah closed her eyes, a faint smile creeping onto her lips. Mark and Emily, the tech specialists, began setting up equipment without hesitation. "Hear what?" Mark asked with a laugh. "It's just the wind." "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's voices. There's something else. Voices." Sarah's eyes snapped open, and she inhaled sharply. "Yes. So many voices. Suffering. This wasn't just a haunting. This was something far worse." Dr. Thorne took charge. "All right, let's get to work." Mark, Emily, set up base camp. "Sarah, do a sweep of the perimeter. Landon, Alicia, you're with me." He motioned toward the prison's looming entrance. "This is going to be good." We crossed the threshold, entering the building. The killing floor wasn't just a room, it was an altar. Skeletal remains littered the cracked concrete, their bones inscribed with symbols I couldn't recognize. Dr. Thorne knelt beside them, inspecting the remains. "These aren't fresh. No one's been here in decades," he murmured. Landon's face had gone white, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He had believed in ghosts, but what we were facing now, this was beyond anything he could have prepared for. We set up cameras, recorders, and sensors, and the seance began. Then everything changed. It wasn't just whispers or flickering lights. No, this was something real. Jepson Bone himself. Not a shadow or a trick of the mind, but a presence. A thing. His form was grotesque, his painted face an abomination. His eyes burned with ember-like fury, and his grin seemed to stretch far too wide. He radiated something worse than evil. He was fear, wrapped in flesh. Then he struck. Sarah was the first to fall. In an instant, his clawed hand plunged into her chest, not through it, into it. His fingers twisted inside her, searching. She gasped, blood bubbling from her lips, and then, crunch. He clenched his fist, and her ribcage collapsed in on itself. With a sickening laugh, he hurled her broken body across the room, her viscera leaving a smear on the wall. And he laughed. That sound, that giggle, would haunt me for the rest of my life. The chaos was instant. Screams filled the air, and we scrambled for the exit. Equipment crashed to the floor. The image of Sarah's mutilated body burned into my memory. We never went back to the prison. The company that funded the documentary retrieved some footage, but the most horrifying moments? Gone. The tapes had been corrupted, replaced with something worse. Not static. Faces. Thousands of them. Faces twisted in agony, their mouths open in a silent scream. A chorus of suffering. The footage made headlines. Proof of the paranormal. But for those of us who survived, it meant nothing. We knew the truth. We had unleashed something we couldn't control, and it was out there, watching us. Then the disappearances started. One person vanished, then another. Soon, news outlets were flooded with reports of unexplained disappearances. Landon and I stayed silent, knowing the truth, but too afraid to speak. We had seen the real horror, and it was coming for us. One night, as I sat with Landon at our kitchen table, he squeezed my hand. "Alicia, I'll fix this." "I promise." There was a fragile hope in his eyes, one I desperately wanted to believe in. "I won't let him take you," he said softly, kissing my forehead. That night, I stepped into the shower, hoping the hot water would wash away the lingering fear. But as I stood there, the bathroom door creaked open behind me. I smiled, thinking it was Landon,